I chased cult crimes, ritual abuse predators, and criminal polygamists for much of my law enforcement career. Let's look into one of these closed societies where the self-proclaimed leader earned a lifetime prison sentence for sexually abusing his child brides. It's Fundamentalist Friday, and we're talking about the FLDS Church. Hey, welcome to Profiling Evil and this special series that I'm doing on the FLDS Church. That's the fundamentalist church that's led by imprisoned child sex abuser Warren Jeffs. As we get started, I hope you'll take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, and make sure you're giving us a thumbs up, everybody. And please consider sharing Profiling Evil with all your friends and your contacts. Now let's begin this discussion by digging into the origins of polygamy. Pop culture would have us believe that it was all started by the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, some members of that church did practice plural marriage over 100 years ago, but it was banned back in 1890 as federal laws were enacted to prevent the practice. Television would have us believe that the mainstream Latter-day Saints are still practicing polygamy, but there's no truth to suggest this is true. In fact, there's nothing to support the idea. There are, however, fundamental and oft excommunicated members of the Latter-day Saint faith who are still pursuing the idea of plural marriage. So much of what I'm going to share with you comes from a neutral academic source, Oxford. And this initial groundwork I'm going to lay down comes from a publication titled Polygamy, a very short introduction by Dr. Sarah M.S. Pearsall. Now, I'm using the study because it's not just the history of polygamy according to the mainstream Latter-day Saint faith, or not polygamy according to the fundamentalist perspective. It comes from an academic approach, and I find there's credibility and value in learning from an independent source that doesn't have a dog in either battle. But without question, the stereotypes of polygamy, sensationalized through programs like Sister Wives or Big Love, focused on the misconception that mainstream Latter-day Saints are embroiled in the illegal practice. And again, it's just not correct. The origins of polygamy actually go way back to the beginnings of humanity. Stories in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, speak of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar living in polygamous relationships. And it doesn't stop there. Dr. Pearsall points out that the practice is found in Peru, Thailand, Eastern Africa, China, Australia, New Zealand, China itself, throughout Europe, and here in the United States, including among the indigenous Americans early on. In fact, you could point a finger at the Middle East or just about any corner of the world to see examples of people generationally practicing plural marriage or polygamy. So with some independent academic theories exposed, I'm also going to share my thoughts on polygamy in the mainstream Latter-day Saint faith. So first, let's start off by catching my thoughts as I recorded them a few days ago as I drove toward Hildale, Utah, the neurocenter of polygamy and the FLDS. Let's listen. Well, hey folks, I wanted to take a few moments and talk a little bit about the history of polygamy. You know, for much of the 19th century, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were practicing plural marriage, or polygamy, the marriage of one man to more than one woman. In 1890, the president of the church, then Wilford Woodruff, issued a manifesto which led to the actual discontinuance of plural marriage. And like the beginning of plural marriage, the end became more of a process rather than just a simple step and saying it's over and we're going to move on. It's interesting how it all came about because in 1886, the church banned polygamy. By 1890, the church published the Manifesto, which was an official declaration that polygamy was not sanctioned by the church or the leadership. Man, this really angered some members of the Latter-day Saint faith who disagreed with the ruling and the decision, saying it wasn't revelation and that they weren't going to go along with it. Well, that led to the church advising them that you either choose to follow the direction of the church leadership and what they said was revelation, or you faced excommunication from the Latter-day Saint faith. And they chose excommunication rather than giving up plural marriage. These unhappy and excommunicated members then started migrating some 300 miles to the south, where they started the Fundamentalist movement that became the FLDS and several break-off factions. And all of that occurred where we're going to talk about these issues: Hildale, Utah, or Colorado City, Arizona, nestled right on the border. In fact, the community is situated on just south of what is known as Zion National Park. So if you made your way over the mountain from Zion National Park, you would be in that Colorado City, Hildale area. And it straddles the Utah and Arizona border. So Hildale, Utah on the north side, Arizona, Colorado City on the southern side of the border, but literally both touching the border. In the early days, the area was known as Short Creek, and it got that name based on a sandy wash and river that ran out of the canyons on the Utah side in a southern direction, crossing over the state line into Arizona. You know, the drive across the open countryside of southern Utah to the north of this community is remote and beautiful, and I hope you're capturing some of that from the scenes I'm showing. It's a beautiful desert perspective. This area we're going to is just south of Zion National Park. Now, if you're driving there from the south, Phoenix, Arizona, for instance, it would take you about 6 hours to make the trip from Phoenix. Phoenix is located at about 1,000 feet above sea level, and the trip would actually climb 5 additional 1,000 feet above sea level to the destination of Colorado City. So let's return to my narrative while I drive toward the FLDS settlement. Now, if we were to look at the history of the area for a moment, going back to the 1800s, Short Creek was known as a stopping point for pioneer travelers who were making their way across. It was an area that was incredibly dangerous for the settlers and for the pioneers that were traveling through, because they had to pass through some dangerous Indian country, Native American country, Indian country. I've heard the term used both ways now, so please don't take offense of one versus another. But the area at the time had murderous individuals, Native American or Indian, who were killing the settlers as they came through. In fact, on October 2nd, 1866, pioneers Robert Berry, his wife Isabel, and his brother Joseph were killed by Indians near a prominent landmark that later would become known as Berry Point or Berry Knoll. And you'll see that on the story map that we have there. Well, as time went on and more people started operating in the area, primarily cattle ranchers, they started using the Short Creek River and the valley during the 1800s, with the first documented settlers being a guy named William B. Maxwell. Now, Maxwell built a ranch house and he lived in the area for an unknown length of time, but it was him that later the Maxwell Park is named after. But the Maxwell name lived on, not only in the naming of that major canyon where the water was coming through, but also the naming of Maxwell Park, and that's Hildale, Utah's park. In 1908, Jacob Laritzen and a guy named Will Rust moved into the Short Creek area with the intention of colonizing the area and starting to move into there with other families and their family. By 1912, their families joined them there and they started this community. And around the same time that this was happening, several other founders moved into the area, including a guy named Isaac Carling, and he's going to later have his name anchored to the city cemetery that we're going to visit at the end of our tour around Colorado City. Now, it was really difficult for those early ranchers and farmers to raise crops and make a living down in Short Creek during those early years. But the pioneers in Short Creek were tough individuals, and they persisted and carved out an existence down in the desert, an existence that turned into a pretty nice looking little community. Well, as more of the fundamentalists who were fleeing other areas where persecution against them, primarily legal persecution, as they fled the area, they started to assemble in the Short Creek region. And the community grew, and so did their family sizes. Polygamy was the way of life, and the members of the community believed that the way God intended them to live was in polygamy, that marriage was a man and multiple wives, and they were to have a batch of children. They believed that that's the way God wanted them to live, and they also believed that the mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was completely off base, and that polygamy was still the order of the day, still God's command, and that the mainstream church had erred in their decision. You know, I drove this route many times during my service as a cult investigator for the Attorney General's office. Entering Short Creek was always intimidating, as these long-sleeved, cowboy hat-wearing men would follow you nonstop through the community in their pickup trucks that were fitted with black-tinted windows, and I'm sure gun racks inside. You never knew how many people were in those trucks, and you wondered what kind of weapon they might be packing. What was really evident, though, was that these men were well trained, and they followed vehicles. They were trained in tailing, and their efforts appeared really well orchestrated to me. You know, I came to that impression because I often would employ my own counter-surveillance techniques, including keeping track of vehicle descriptions, license numbers, photographs, etc. It was truly a game of cat and mouse. And to increase their frustration, from time to time I'd stop at their local businesses and feign some interest in commerce. My face was well known, so trying to do so in an undercover capacity would have been absolutely futile. Whenever I'd stop and buy a soda, I'd try to have a conversation with the employees who were clearly uncomfortable with my interactions. Rarely were they friendly, and they would only respond in short answers of yes or no. They wore the uniform of the FLDS, a long-sleeve shirt for the men and prairie dresses for the women, of course, with that signature hairstyle. As I drove around collecting information back then, it was obvious that the two communities were working together. Legitimate law enforcement agencies across the region knew that the police department there couldn't be trusted. Like everyone in Short Creek, the police officers worked under the direction of the FLDS Church and its leaders. I knew that they would place the laws of their God over the laws of the state and or the nation. They claimed they were really patriotic, but it seemed to me that they only cared about supporting laws that supported their own lifestyle. By way of a point, they would utilize every state and federal handout they could take advantage of, but they would avoid paying taxes or providing services like most communities would. They didn't have diversity in the community, and they didn't allow input from anyone except for members of the FLDS ideology. Working hand in glove with the FLDS police force was the dignitary protection team of the leadership of the FLDS and the holdings they had. The leader of dignitary protection back then was a man named Willie Jessup. and we were formidable enemies. Jessup watched my actions closely, knowing that I represented the evil arm of government, intent on uncovering FLDS secrets and disrupting their enterprise. I, in turn, understood that he would do anything to protect the FLDS leadership, its community, its holding, but above all, the self-proclaimed prophet, a man he felt was God's mouthpiece on earth. Our mutual disdain continued for 20 years. That is until 2022, when I reached out to Willie Jessup with an invitation to meet for lunch. It took a few days for Jessup to respond, and at first he declined. But then he agreed to meet me for just a few minutes. I'm sure he was curious about what I wanted to talk about, and we arranged the meeting to take place in Hildale a few weeks later. On the day of our détente, we met on the sidewalk outside the home Jessup built for Warren Jeffs, the now imprisoned prophet. The location was really intriguing to me because Jeff ordered the construction of this home as he sat in prison. A loyal follower and protector, Jessup took the order literally, and over just 12 months of time, he built a compound that was capable of housing Warren Jeffs' 87 wives, any visiting dignitaries from FLDS outposts, and a large and fortified separate home for Jeffs himself. This massive structure required round-the-clock labor from the members of the community who gave everything that they had to answer the call of their prophet Warren Jeffs. The massive structure required round-the-clock labor from the members of the FLDS, but they gave everything they had to answer the call of their prophet, Warren Jeffs. They converted a 40-acre parcel of farmland into a complex that was surrounded by an 18-foot cement wall that in places was up to 2 feet thick. It had a large metal fence barrier that sat atop this cement fence and large metal gates that were controlled by access and controlled the access into and out of the complex. As we conversed on the sidewalk, Willie Jessup began to soften. Our conversation must have been more beneficial than he expected because before long, he invited me to climb into his truck so that we could grab some lunch. We ate at B's grocery store, something that you would have never seen built back in the heyday of the FLDS community. And I gotta say, while we ate some excellent brisket, being there was interesting as I watched men and women who were obviously fundamentalists shopping alongside men and women who were more secular in their outward appearances. Our discussion continued for over 8 hours, and I mean that literally, folks, 8 hours. We traveled from one FLDS site to another as I asked questions from a cop's perspective, and he responded from a polygamist insider's perspective. We agreed at the end of that we'd meet from time to time to answer each other's questions. Well, since then, we've had a number of conversations, including a long-standing invitation for me to come and spend the night in Warren Jeffs' home. And that's what brings us to this video, and the night I slept in the polygamist's home. I arrived shortly after 5 p.m., and I was greeted at the door by one of Jessup's wives. She was dressed in traditional fundamentalist clothing, those long prairie dresses. Her hair was long and pulled back like almost every other polygamist in the community. She was very kind and accommodating, and she set me up with a room near an exit and on the first floor. That was my request, by the way. There was only one other person staying in the massive structure that night, and walking the dark halls was eerie. The walls were covered halfway up with carpet, and it reminded me a lot of the Zion Society cult homes, the carpeting on the walls. Walking down each hallway was unremarkable, except to say that it was one room after another, and another, and another, and on and on. Going to sleep in a room that was built for the man who ended up on the FBI's most wanted list, and by the way, I've got him pictured right next to Osama bin Laden here, a world terrorist. Sleeping there was the last thing that I pictured myself doing. That evening, I decided to go live on YouTube and share what that experience was like. And I was joined by thousands of you who were really interested. And if you didn't catch that episode, go over to my playlist and grab it and watch it. But being alone in the home had its advantages. I could hear every noise and crook, creak, groan. My bed was next to a large window with my truck parked only 50 feet away. But I actually slept very soundly, and the room was really quite nice. Hey folks, I want to take a quick break though, because I've been toying with the idea of guiding a few small groups of profiling evil enthusiasts on a tour of the FLDS stomping grounds, Hildale, Utah, Colorado City, Arizona. I think a nice agenda would be to meet on the evening of day one at the Most Wanted Inn, the home built for Warren Jeffs. We'd assemble that night in the big room and have a discussion about the history of the area and polygamy. You'd then be free to walk around this quiet little town or just call it a night. But the next morning, we'd get together for breakfast. We'd eat there at the lodge cooked by polygamous women and tour some of the more important sites in the area, stopping at each one to learn more about the culture and the crimes. We'd probably grab lunch in town and then wrap up the tour by early afternoon, leaving you enough time to travel on to other incredible destinations in the area, like Zion National Park or Snow Canyon. You might even tackle the Arizona Trail to Little Black Mountain, where the Anasazi Indian carvings are, or the dinosaur tracks in Warner Valley, or Glitter Mountain, where you can pick up selenite crystals. If this is something you'd be interested in and having me personally guide you, reach out to me at profilingevil.com. The area is in the southwest corner of Utah, so it's about 2 hours from Las Vegas, Nevada. Great place to fly in and out of if you want to go have some more fun. But let's get back to our discussion. Well, early the next morning, I met Sam Zitting-Wyson, a former member of the FLDS and the creator of Growing Up in Polygamy on YouTube. He and his wife, Melissa, have become good friends as we've discussed Sam's departure from the FLDS at age 18, along with the challenges that he faced then and even today in matriculating into a society that he once didn't trust. I invited Sam to come into Jeff's home with me, but he was really reticent. I learned that he was nervous about going inside, knowing that it was built for Warren Jeffs and understanding what happened inside those ugly places. Well, as we talked, he agreed to trust me, and we walked around the interior, and it was interesting to listen to Sam as he looked around. Now, you can learn more about his experience by visiting Growing Up in Polygamy, and I hope you'll consider subscribing to those folks. But let's watch some of this video of Sam talking inside the Warren Jeffs home.
I can't believe I'm here. I told myself I wasn't going to come into this home because it was a home built. It was going to be for Warren Jeffs and all of his wives, but a good friend of mine, Mike King, convinced me to walk in, and here I am. But this is interesting. It's not too surprising considering how big it is, how many rooms and the hallways being extremely long, but it is a weird feeling being in the home that Warren Jeffs himself was having built for his wives and family, which just crazy to be in here. Can't believe it.
Sam and I then went outside and we talked about the home and shared our own memories of that particular time period. Let's take a minute and listen to that. Well, hey everybody, I'm Mike from Profiling Evil.
And I'm Sam here with Growing Up in Polygamy.
And we're here at the home of Warren Jeffs. It was a newly constructed home, Sam, that he never got to see. But this is your stomping grounds.
This is. In fact, my home is just, I could almost throw a rock to it. Back in my day, I could throw a rock to it, but not anymore. But yes, it's just around the corner here. This home, I actually was under the impression that Warren Jeffs stayed in it at one point, but I recently learned that it was built after he was incarcerated. So that was new to me.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, if folks go back to one of my earlier videos, you'll actually see imagery where I put when this was just nothing but a field, and then different stages of the construction. Because back then, I was investigating the FLDS, Warren Jeffs, and my nemesis, Willie Jessup, is the guy who ended up owning this facility.
Yeah, how about that? I remember Willie very well around the town. He was one of, I guess you could say, Warren's right-hand man. You know, he was doing a lot for him, and you know, it's interesting to see that now Willie has come in and helped so much to turn this community around and take it away from Warren Jeffs in some way or another.
You know, Willie and I were mortal enemies. And of course, he was trying to protect the prophet. He served 3 prophets as bodyguard. He started as a young boy with Johnson, and then became Rulon Jeff's bodyguard, and then ultimately Warren Jeff's bodyguard, and became state's evidence against Warren when he discovered that Warren was raping children in the Yearning for Zion church building that was built down there. But Willie personally told me about this experience and the fact that the walls, and we're going to be looking at some imagery that I took with the drone yesterday of the construction of these things, but these walls were built from a vision that Warren had while he sat in prison in Texas. And that vision was to have these high walls. Now, listen to a few of Willie Jessup's comments about this fortress that he built for Jeffs.
Well, the walls are pure concrete, or white, all the way inside. It's got more steel in it than anything you can imagine. You could hit them with a full load of dump truck and hardly crack them. Panels are steel with lining to keep it from being, so we could protect him from assassinations and that kind of stuff. You'd have to go to get to his house. You'd have to come through this wall, through that wall, to even get to the house.
That's not completely unseen in Colorado City.
Oh, no, it became very common, actually, especially around the homes of those that were high up in the church, not necessarily just the prophet, but also leaders, the bishop and other people. And it was interesting because it was when Warren took over, or just before his father died, that all of a sudden we saw all of these walls popping up. And so that says something about who Warren was and how he wants to keep everything secretive.
That's crazy. You know, I've done a little bit of construction around my home. I've had new driveways poured. Cement is expensive.
It is.
And we're looking at walls that are, from what I've been told, 18 feet tall. Now, I don't know, maybe they're 12 feet tall. And with the extension, maybe close to 18. But these walls are 2 feet thick in some areas. Imagine the cost in just putting walls in, let alone building a home that would house at least 87 wives.
Right. It was helpful that everyone in the community did some kind of construction. And so everyone here, not everyone, but a lot of people owned construction companies. And so there were concrete companies and all the other things you would need to build a house that they would do, and they would do it for Warren for free.
That is crazy. Now, we're looking at an image of me flying a drone in a 360-degree radius around the building and the complex right now. And out on this east end is a number of condominium-type units that were set up not only for some of the special wives, according to Willie, but also visiting authorities from other reaches of the FLDS. So if the leadership, Blackmore, for instance, in the early days came from Canada, it was a place where he could stay.
Wow.
And then as we continue this flight and we're looking at it, we also have this area where where Warren Jeff's home actually was, which isn't where his wives are living. Why don't you explain kind of the layout here?
Well, Warren Jeffs at one point had about 80 wives. So there wasn't really a house big enough to hold all of his wives at one time. And so it was one of those things where he did have some of his wives living with him in his home before he was put in prison in his other home. But the one we're standing in front of today was going to be an extra one for all of his wives so that he could have a place for all of them to stay.
Well, and in this layout that we're looking at now, and as I take the drone, we're going to kind of fly toward the way in which Warren's bodyguards would have brought him home when he came home. And of course, he comes through this outer gate, which again, we got these 18-foot cement walls, but and that outer gate was secured by a large metal door. And as you came in, that door opened, and kind of like a sally port in a jail. When one door closes, then another door can open. And so that's when Warren's gate into his residence, which is just to our right, folks, would open up, and he would pull in with security officers all along the way to protect from what's going on there. So as they came in, they would go, one sally port or one metal door would close, securing Warren inside of the compound. But then the compound wasn't good enough. He had an internal compound that he would then go through another metal door and into where his residence was. And to go see the wizard, for lack of a better term, was a big feat. In fact, what was that like as a kid to run into the prophecy?
Oh man, well, it was interesting. It got less and less likely as time went on. When I was a very young boy, I actually spent time in his home, spent time in his father's home, and shook his hand and said hello multiple times with him. And that was just an honor. It was a huge honor to be able to meet them. But as time went on, you started to see these things where even the home that he lived in before the law was after him, the gate would open. There was a big wall around that house too, and the gate would open. He would drive in, it would close before he even got into the garage. So it was very common for him to just be almost invisible. We never really got to see him as time went on.
Well, folks, Sam and I are going to travel around in Hildale, Colorado City, and we're going to give you a chance to see things from our perspective, the cop's view and the kid who lived in a polygamous community.
Looking forward to it.
Well, this is part 1 of a 12-part series, so don't miss next week's Fundamentalist Friday. We're going to be exploring Maxwell Park as we try to answer the question, what's in the water? We'll also take a deeper look into the neurocenter of the FLDS polygamous group here in southern Utah. I hope that you'll take some time and put your comments down below and let me know what you're thinking about this series and about this case in general. Remember that you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course on YouTube. And listen, folks, if you like audio podcasts, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And please, folks, make sure you go over to profilingevil.com and sign up for our digital newsletter, the BOLO. That stands for Be on the Lookout, police terminology. And signing up for the BOLO is the only way you're going to get it. So remember, you got to go to profilingevil.com to sign up. Now, if you found this topic to be interesting, you might also like to read my book, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. It chronicles my investigation into and the ultimate takedown of a ritual cult that committed thousands of felony abuses against children. You can order it signed through profilingevil.com, or you can get it on Amazon. So thanks again, folks, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.